Thank you so much, Eric, for coming on the show today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I discovered you from your book, The Almanack of Naval Ravikant. And, I understand you're also a product strategist at Zaarly, helping people find home services. You've got a business blog that's a few years old at this point, that's got a lot of nice material on there. And then you're also reviewing online courses, something called Course Correctly. So you're doing a lot of interesting things. But first and foremost, I wanted to get together because the book was just fascinating to me. I've liked Naval for a while now. And no one's taken the length of effort that you did in putting his wisdom into something that could be consumed relatively quickly, and then also kind of referenced thereon after for these pieces of advice, whether it comes to wealth or happiness, whatever it might be. For those people who aren't so familiar with you or with the book, would love to hear, from the bottom up, growing up, your story, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I kind of always, my dad ran a business that my grandfather started. And so we were always kind of an entrepreneurial household. So I was busy like selling candy out of my locker and getting paid to give kids rides to school and stuff. Um, I'm always kind of looking for opportunities. I was really excited to kind of work in the startup world. I was in college when like Facebook was blowing up, and entrepreneurship and tech were almost synonymous, which is definitely not true, but that's how it looked to me at 18. Um, it's been a fun kind of place to be, and this book is just kind of one of a long series of things that I thought that the world needed, and was excited to kind of take on as like a almost as a hobby that ends up doing some people some good. So it was a lot of fun to do and rewarding for me personally. And it's really exciting to kind of share it with the world, and hear people are enjoying it.
So, do you have like a lot of free time outside of your work at Zaarly, or at least enough where you're able to kind of pursue these passion projects?
Yeah, it's not a lot of time actually. But when you give yourself kind of no deadline, like that was the good thing about this, is that some weeks or months I didn't have any time to work on it at all, but there was no deadline, so I could just kind of keep putting time into it when I could find time. And it's not like a newsletter or something like that where I have to put in a couple hours a week. So it's like running a marathon, like a little few chunks at a time, and when I can gain the ground, I do it. It kind of is a perfect type of project to fit around my life now, and not interfere too much with my other commitments. Um, but it's good for me. It's like it's almost like a study, and I work harder, knowing that I have a final product that I'm going to put out there and put my name on it and share with people. A lot of people take notes when they're reading, but when you're taking notes to the level of making it a good enough thing to publish under your own name, you just work a lot harder at it. You put in a lot more reps, and invest a lot more in the final product. And I think I'm better for it, and I think the world's better for it. So I think it's a good practice.
Yeah, look, man, I mean, I certainly appreciate it. Like I said, Naval, you can follow him on Twitter and get some of his wisdom that way. I think his podcasts are pretty underrated. Specifically, he has like a 3 hour one, which is basically an
Hmm.
extension. I mean, I don't need to tell you about it, but for those listening, it's an extension of, his famous How to Get Rich tweet thread, tweet storm, I guess it's called. And the podcast I actually thought was like, an order of magnitude more, insightful for me. I think I also just prefer the long form, and some of these
Hmm.
short form tweets are, they carry a lot of weight, and I'm not taking anything away from his ability to summarize big points into a few words, but for me, it's helpful to get the context as well. So I imagine you kind of became interested in Naval years ago, and then have just been kind of ruthlessly consuming his content. And then, I understand initial drafts of your book were several times longer than it ended up being. What's it like to kind of turn yourself into basically the expert on Naval's wisdom, and, whether it's again wealth or happiness or everything?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know that. I've spent a lot of time with the ideas, and kind of a broad slice of them. I'm sure there's people who are much smarter at than me at any individual one of them. Um, I've learned a lot from Naval, and I've been following him for 10 years or so, since kind of the early days that he started blogging. But he's talked about a lot of different things over those 10 years as his focus has shifted and as his attention has kind of turned from building a company to building a fund to pursuing happiness and preserving and investing and some of those sorts of things. I don't know. I think it was the right thing for me to be studying with, where I am in life, and that's different for everybody. There's definitely like a foundation of concepts that it helps to kind of understand if you're going to be able to unpack, something like a tweet or a tweet storm into the full understanding. And kind of that was the practice that I did for the book, and that I hope helps other people. Exactly like you said, it's rewarding maybe to read a tweet storm, but if you can't kind of expand one of those subfolders or one of those words into understanding all the implications of compounding and how to actually evaluate it or use it. Accountability, leverage is one of those words. Like, you could write an entire book on leverage, you could write an entire book on accountability, you can write an entire book on compounding, and those are things that Naval kind of says that the concepts are important, but he's not going to take the time to break them all down individually, all the way down to kind of first principles. Like, he doesn't want to be there writing a textbook about it, and so it takes some of that context and some of that study outside of what he actually talks about to kind of get the full value of it, I think.
Right. And that's what I want to spend some time doing today, is talking with you about some of these concepts. And, obviously Naval's not here. Like, we appreciate the initial words and the jump start on some of these ideas, but I'd like to, I've heard you speak on other podcasts and things like that, and think you have a really interesting perspective. And these things obviously are somewhat important to varying degrees to me as well, in terms of the sorts of, lessons and guiding principles that he talks about. So would love to kind of just shoot them back and forth with you. First one, I think you mentioned, is kind of the value of compound interest. He talks about how all returns in life, whether it's wealth, relationships, or knowledge, basically come from compound interest. And, on the money side, it's fairly obvious. It's like, everyone kind of understands. Maybe honestly, not everyone understands, but for people who are familiar with the term compound interest, they're familiar with it usually in the sense that if you put money into an account that's growing 10% every year, that will grow surprisingly quickly over time because the base is growing and the percentage is the same. And so, I forget what it is exactly, but it's like $100 can like 37x over the course of a year or something like that. And so it's a very powerful thing. Einstein once said that like compound interest might be the most powerful force in the universe, I think. How do you think about compound interest, whether it's in money, in relationships, anything else, in terms of, and how are you using it in your life?
Yeah, it is definitely an important concept, and it kind of comes from my family was enough of a like dabbling in amateur investing to kind of talk about compounding and all of what Jack Bogle says and Warren Buffett preached about, just definitely living below your means, saving, reinvesting, and how much it doesn't look like much every day, but over a decade or a lifetime, the changes of that are absolutely incredible. And that's one of the kind of key pieces of compounding, is that it looks very slow at first, and for maybe a long time it looks like almost nothing is happening. But with patience and the right temperament and dedication to that idea, really, really incredible things happen. I mean, if you look at Warren Buffett, has had almost 2 entire careers as an investor. He started when he was 13 or 14 buying his first stocks, and now he's in his 90s. Like, that's incredible. And so much of his wealth actually came when he was in his 60s and 70s and 80s. He has had great results the whole time, but the nature of compounding is that each year, now that he's in his 80s and 90s, is adds more incremental wealth than his first 10 or 20 years combined. and that is really, really incredible, but it takes the vision of what can happen over 80 years to persist through the first, 10, 20, 30 before you start to really see those effects take place. And Naval talks about, this is compounding is talked about a lot in the financial world, but Naval kind of generalizes that a little bit to, the compounding trust of relationships and, compounding focus on ideas and persistence around starting companies and things like that. So looking at, compounding just as a general principle that all of the best things come from, patience and persistence and dedication to incremental inputs and eventual exponential outputs. Having the mindset that you're willing to kind of be impatient with, those inputs and patient with the results. To see what can come of compounding and to trust that is, what's at the other end of that patience and that effort.
Yeah, I think it's valuable for me in the sense that it gives you, like you just said, the kind of trust to, if you can identify certain habits that seem beneficial, although, just like you're not going to get rich overnight, you're also not going to get like ripped overnight. But if you work out
Mm-hmm.
every day for 15 minutes for 40 years, you probably like will be, even though it's just 15 minutes. And maybe that's, maybe not totally ripped, but you'll be in pretty good shape probably. So it's an interesting, I think, concept to be applied far beyond money. And like you said, relationships, I think is an interesting way to think about it as well. Um,
Yeah,
so
it is maybe the most tangible in the financial world. You can look at a compounding chart or like pull out a compounder calculator and run some numbers and just, it's not intuitive to us how extreme the results are. It's pretty wild. I mean, biologically, like where we see, you can think about it that way for health. It's not mathematically going to work the same way just because we get older and we degrade, but it's fair to say that like, good habits compound and stack on each other and kind of that momentum, gets, has increasing returns, I think. It's a little bit of an abuse of the the formula probably, but just as is it a directionally correct thought? Like, yeah, probably.
So you mentioned, the concept of living below your means, and I think Naval has a quote about this as well, which is, that you basically have a freedom from that people who continue to scale their lifestyle and therefore their cost of living as they accumulate wealth, which tends to happen in most classic traditional career tracks. So long as you keep scaling your cost of living, you have the golden handcuffs, as they say. Um, when you think about the way that you've like progressed in your career, you've built, we'll get to leverage later. You've built these systems where you can, you launch this book and it's not just like you're writing it and keeping it to yourself. You have Twitter and you have other outlets where you've established an audience, and then you can tell them that you have this book, and all of a sudden it's not luck that it goes viral and gets really popular. It's almost destiny. How have you over time freed up, I guess, the opportunity to not have to continue to work harder and harder to make more and more money to sustain a growing lifestyle? Was it just simply, or maybe you have done that, but curious to hear, like, for me, it's something I think about a lot is, what do I actually need? And
Mm-hmm.
what makes me happy versus what's all that extra stuff that really is just going to put me on a treadmill.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a very personal decision. Like, um, different things make different people happy. Different people have different levels of needs, different personalities in their family, and some things are luxuries to some people, and just learning to separate like what's a need, what's a want, what's a luxury, and like at the same time understanding that have limited time on the earth, and in some cases money can buy happiness. You can buy comfort, you can buy safety, you can buy at least fleeting joy from plenty of things. But you got to like find your own balance, I think. But just understanding that, you know, money can only solve your money problems, but there are plenty of money problems. And you're gonna, if you are living closer to your means, or certainly beyond your means, you're just creating a whole new kind of axis of misery for yourself. And you know, for those who are kind of trying to build wealth and certainly build wealth toward the aim of independence, you know, a huge way to accomplish that is just getting, you know, that margin between your earnings and your savings and investing the difference until you can, you know, live off of the compounding returns of your investments and your savings. You know, that doesn't work for absolutely everybody, but it is certainly like a tried and true formula. And it's, you know, in the same way that, you know, fitness and weight gain or weight loss is kind of a function of like calories consumed and calories burned. But most people don't track the calories closely enough to know where they are. It's a matter of like, what are the habits and what are your attitudes and what are your, you know, when you're not thinking hard about it and focusing on it, you know, what are the things that you do almost automatically, and are they net positive or net negative? And usually like that is what's going to determine your long-term results. And so focusing on correcting those habits, those almost unconscious decisions, to be sure that you have an instinct and a bias towards net positive decisions instead of net negative decisions, are going to have absolutely huge returns in life.
So you talked on another podcast, I think it was with David Perel, about kind of a mental model that you keep, which is that, you know, in talking with people seeking advice on career or life, whatever it might be. And I thought of this because the way you just spoke about how it's like a personal thing for everyone, that threshold of the money that's kind of needed, or, you know, the set of things that's needed versus, you know, for other people that might be a lot higher based on, you know, the way that they grew up, certain things regarding, you know, their health that might require them to just, they have more expenses for whatever reason, wherever they're born, and might have a higher cost of living. You talked about this triangle for people where there's, you know, on one corner, there's basically people who prioritize working for themselves and being able to work on what they want. There's another corner of people who kind of want the corner office, as you say, and want to optimize for career in a little bit of a different way. You know, they don't care as much about being able to make the calls. They just want to make a lot of money. Not, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, and kind of, you know, have people working for them and make big decisions and things like that. And then separately, there's the person who just kind of, you know, work and career is not the biggest thing for them, and they want to, you know, get a comfortable job that pays the bills, and they go 9 to 5 or whatever it is, and then they can kind of return home and get to their life. I'm curious, where do you think that you are on the spectrum there, and where do you think Naval's wisdom kind of lends itself most?
Yeah, I think I generalize those a little bit into, you kind of have three options, and you basically, they are all trade-offs, mutual trade-offs with each other. And you can either choose like power or comfort or freedom. And it's really hard to have two of those at the same time. And so if you had to pick one of those, which would you pick? I definitely bias towards freedom. I wouldn't be all the way extremely there, but I'd be probably like much more, I'd be somewhere in the middle of the triangle, like erring strongly towards freedom. I think Naval probably would as well. I think Naval's principles hold certainly for people pursuing freedom, also very likely for people pursuing power. And I don't know, I'm far enough from a like seeking comfort mindset that that it's hard to make a snap judgment. So I'd have to think about it a little bit harder. I think they're probably less prone to that, but it depends a little bit on, you know, how you pursue comfort and what stage of your career you're in. If you're in later stage of your career and seeking comfort, I think Naval's ideas around building leverage are definitely key. Accountability is something that is tied very clearly with power and with freedom. And I think there's a ways to seek comfort where you actually unbundle yourself from accountability, and you limit your downside to get that comfort and that safety, but you are also limiting your upside. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I probably have to like sit and write and sketch to like fully wrap my head around it. But it's interesting to kind of overlay those two things.
Yeah, no, I think that was a super insightful response, and like not being able to sympathize as much with the comfort side of the equation, makes sense that you might not have as strong of a perspective there. Um, Leverage is something that's seems to be, obviously it's a huge theme for Naval, and it seems to be one of the biggest themes for you and takeaways there as well. You have, I think, your Twitter bio begins with says using levers. You had a nice tweet storm the other day of your thoughts on leverage, and my understanding, like I kind of understand the importance of the way Naval frames. I think that's one of the things where with succinctly, he's able to describe it in a way that's very understandable. But curious to hear how you think about leverage and how you specifically apply it in your own life, whether it's with the book or with Twitter or any other things that you do.
Yeah, I really think that Naval did us all a favor with uh, just kind of using that term for this new phenomenon. Um, you know, like levers have been around a long time. It's one of the simple machines that built, the pyramids at Stonehenge, and like humans have been using levers for a long time. But we are seeing, kind of an increasing and accelerating um, sense of productivity, as more and more and more humans, like a higher percentage of the population, just focuses on building ever more powerful and useful tools and systems of tools and platforms. And we get more and more networked and better at kind of driving meritocratic adoption of ideas and media. And one of the things Naval says is like, in the age of infinite leverage, like the best person at anything gets to do it for everyone. I could very reasonably see that in our lifetimes, the very best elementary school math teacher in the world is broadcast to billions and billions of people, because they are just so much more effective at it. Rather than having, a 1 to 30 ratio, we now have a 1 to 30 million or 1 to 300 million ratio. And that was never possible before. And that's just like kind of one example of the amount of leverage that one human can get, with the modern tools that we have here. So it is, I mean, it's super interesting to me. I think that in labeling it, Naval has kind of helped us all to have a piece of language to identify and talk about a phenomenon that is kind of surrounding us, and is helping to explain a lot of the crazy outcomes that we're seeing, right? Like Joe Rogan, with basically one employee, is now a media company worth hundreds of millions of dollars unto himself. And that wasn't possible 50 years ago. There was Johnny Carson with a late night talk show with a whole bunch of staff and broadcasting and infrastructure and all of these things. But we're now seeing greater and greater accomplishments by fewer and fewer people due to tools and distribution and platforms, and all of these things that are happening. And essentially, like any hour or any day, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of digitally cloned Joe Rogans out there, like rebroadcasting and resharing his ideas, through these kind of the leverage that comes from digital products. And it's just really, really interesting to see how that's affecting society and where else that's going to go. Like I only see that accelerating, really. And we're seeing it across, almost every aspect of life. And the people who see how to kind of gather and apply those levers to their goals are going to massively outwork and outstrip and outgrow people who are not, even if they are doing the exact same job. Um, it doesn't matter white collar, blue collar job. It doesn't matter where in the world you are. Um, there's a lot of podcasts out there, but some podcasts are a million times bigger than others, and some of it is due to quality, and some of it is due to leverage. And those things are very interrelated, and we're just going to see that gap kind of keep growing. The levered are going to get more levered, and people who don't understand that, don't see that that's the game that's getting played, are just, I think, going to be kind of stuck and confused about it. And so I'm trying to kind of keep unpacking those ideas and help people see them and help people talk about them, and pull together more of those playbooks and help people solve problems in leveraged ways.
Yeah, and that's a great overview. And like I know you're thinking about this kind of stuff a lot. You mentioned like one example of the teacher, the best teacher in a certain course is all of a sudden available. He or she can teach millions, even a billion hypothetically people. There's zero marginal cost to delivering an online product over the internet across the world. What are some other, whether it's the digital product side of leverage or, something that's even, less novel, such as kind of the capital or labor side of it. What are some specific examples that you see coming to fruition? Like you talk about how kind of the leveraged will separate from the unleveraged, and it's only just the beginning. I mean, you think about the internet, it's only seriously like 20, 25 years old at most. And that's enabled a lot of the digital product side of things. Where, what places do you see this being applied / what specific strategies of leverage, like you talk about using levers, what are those levers?
Yeah, Naval's classification of the broad categories of levers, it was capital and labor and product, mostly digital products, media, code, algorithms, things like that. I would add tools as like a broad category that I think is very helpful, and a good kind of starting place if you're thinking through all of the history of leverage. Really, it started with tools, and then labor and capital came, within the last 1,000 or 2,000 years, really. And now the no marginal cost of replication through all the digital products, the software and the code and media is really very transformative. And I mean, application wise, it's absolutely everywhere, right? Like you can imagine a levered, like, I mean, I see this, you don't even have to imagine a levered, a plumbing company that focuses on building leverage through capital, through tools, through digital media can be 10 or 100 times more productive, frankly, than an unlevered version of the same company. Even if the unlevered one is maybe more skilled, but the other one brings in a larger team and consults with experts and uses an agency to kind of drive their marketing. Like that's a form of labor leverage, just by pulling in experts to do things that, fractionally that they are better at. A better website, a better lead gen model. You can think about those, the process of that CRM, having a bunch of no-code tools and automations, and maybe getting scheduled with like a Calendly AI tool rather than, multiple staffers or just that one plumber who's trying to kind of like get to his phone at the end of the night. So that is a very kind of like analog example. But if you look at it purely like media business, you can see even significantly more extreme results than that, I think. Yeah, and we're going to see a lot of those examples, and there's a lot of people. I've had some very interesting conversations. People are kind of like intuiting their way forward through this. Like they kind of step in leverage and feel it sort of start, and they're like, "Oh wow, that feels amazing. I'm gonna like kind of keep exploring new ways to do that." And like Jack Butcher is doing an incredible job of this. Nathan Lotka is doing an incredible job with this. Zach Cantor built a fully, his first company. He started when he was in his, I think he was just a teenager. It's basically a fully automated auto parts distributor. And his constraint on himself was like, I'm the only employee. And so he built everything as, as automations essentially. It was built it up to be a very, very like successful, like doing big numbers with one employee as one guy. And that was a physical business. So we're going to see more and more of those stories, and smaller teams accomplishing incredible things, building on top of open source tools or pre-existing platforms like, Shopify, Amazon, WordPress, stuff like that. It's going to be a very cool next, I don't know. It's hard to see past like 10 or 20 years even, of what this is going to look like. But, the productivity increases in tools is recursive. It just keeps feeding back into the productivity of the people who are making the tools. And so the returns on leverage are accelerating dramatically.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's a few things I want to kind of unpack there. First, I thought it was super interesting the way you framed like the history of leverage from, tools to then basically labor and then capital and then, now digital products. I didn't really think of it on like the time scale before, but what's also interesting about that to me is that, you talked about like Joe Rogan. He's actually not really using the labor. I mean, if you want to, in a technical sense, there's people working on the tools, I guess, that he's using and whatnot. But like you said, he's kind of like a business of one. He's got Jamie who's helping him out. But besides that, it's like a one-man operation, and he's making, my understanding is hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And having hundreds of millions, I presume, of listens as well. Most popular podcast in the world, and he's up against like the New York Times, which has, I don't know how many people working for them. So it's kind of interesting. I had never really thought of it this way before, but I wonder if to some extent the newer forms of leverage tend to displace the older. And if that's not the case, at the very least, I think the older tend to evolve such that they're different. Like you're not going to get much use out of like a tractor anymore, but you're going to get a lot of use out of something that I think you mentioned, basically something along these lines of like something that can respond to emails without you having to actually think or do anything. And I just saw a business that was doing this the other day with like GPT-3, just automating email responses, and you just kind of can configure a couple things if you want to. And then you don't have to actually do any thinking, and you save all that time, and you can process, between that and something like Superhuman, you can probably process, thousands of emails a day if you want. And then you only have to check, once every day or once every couple of days or whatever it is. Do you have thoughts on like that evolution of leverage and how, tools are changing, the nature of labor and capital are changing as well? Like for instance, labor doesn't need to be physical. You can hire people from India for less capital. And then on the capital side, you have things like crypto, where one thing I'm excited about is I think sooner than later, and people are a little bit doing this, but you'll be able to basically, so like what I think about this for myself, honestly, I've started this podcast and had, pretty good guests on so far and some reasonable early success, but it actually takes a while, the nature of compound interest and everything like that, to be successful and to monetize and everything like that. But if you could, if you could sell people that you're going to be, the fact that you're going to be successful later, then they can actually give you money capital now, and then you can, use that, and as long as they kind of buy the compound interest, you'll be in good shape.
Yeah, I think, there's lots to unpack there. I mean, the labor and capital leverage are old and have been around a long time, but there are also, I think they're also pretty lindy, like they're not going anywhere. And we do see those things transform, right? So labor leverage may not look, as it already doesn't look quite as much like, hey, I have to go hire full-time staff who sit in an office. Now it looks more like Upwork and more like agencies and more like, short-term contracts of people who find each other anywhere in the world through Dribble or through Twitter or, through Scribd or whatever. In the future, it may be even more kind of, like a distributed autonomous thing where there's just a general global universal central, board of tasks that people can go and like pick up. And if you meet certain credential levels, you can take that work and it doesn't even matter who you are or where you are. Um, so labor changes a lot. I think actually another way that labor leverage is evolving is that audiences and fans and subscribers, like all of those things count as people and labor leverage. And a big audience compounds sort of in the same way that a big investment account compounds. It's easier to grow 1,000 followers a week when you already have 100,000 followers than it is when you only have 1,000. So those things aren't stagnant, right? Labor and capital leverage are evolving just as tools are evolving and just as products are evolving. You mentioned tractors in there too. I think tractors are like a hugely underrated thing. And if you look at one of the best ways to see the growth of labor over the course of human history is to look at the percentage of the human population that is involved in agriculture. And so, 500, 700 years ago, in 1300, almost 70% of the population was dedicated to growing food and raising stock and just feeding themselves and the other 30%. And so, we were not a very productive species compared to where we are now, where 3% of the population works in agriculture and feeds themselves and the other 97%. Give or take. Not everybody gets fed, and we need to keep kind of increasing productivity and distribution to solve that. But the percentage of human society that is now focused on improving tools, on improving productivity, on building new things, on fundamental research, used to be a fraction of a percent, and now it's maybe 10%, maybe it's 30%. It depends a lot on the country. But that is where we talk about, those gains getting reinvested into increased productivity and increased pace of innovation. Like that's where that comes from. And so I think the tractor, it may not be relevant to you, but it is very, very relevant to all of us in that it lets, 10 people farm 10,000 acres and grow enough food for 1,000 people, even though there's just that team of 10 doing it. And that's, those innovations and those pieces of leverage from tools and learning and capital are the foundation of every other, bit of reinvestment that we all benefit from.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point in how, and I didn't mean to marginalize the impact of the tractor by any means.
The noble tractor, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Huge. And I think you laid it out perfectly in terms of how, people don't have to farm anymore. So now we can, go and do this, like there's this whole knowledge worker economy or even manufacturing, whatever it is, people are building things. They don't have to worry about, growing food. And I personally, you kind of hinted at what seemed like a really intriguing vision for the future, which was that, I might be reading between the lines a little bit, but basically that, more than food can be automated to the extent, and obviously there's still people managing the leverage. So automated might not be the exactly right word, but automated in the sense of like, when you were speaking earlier, I was thinking of like Tim Ferriss' 4-Hour Work Week was one of the first things that helped me realize like, wow, this guy basically built this business. He's not the only one working, but it's his business and pretty much his business only. And then he's got leverage in basically all forms, and he only has to work 4 hours a week. It's kind of like the sum of the book. And so I think about a future where not only food is kind of taken care of by, whatever minuscule percentage of the population that is able to do incredible work and feed the world with such strong leverage, but you also may have like healthcare that's able to be, you don't need a doctor to do an operation anymore. You can have robots do operations, and therefore, the doctors can just help train the robots. And I sort of see a future, and I don't know, I hope I live to see it, where people have their basic needs met across the board, basically. And, the definition of needs and wants can be argued, of course, but talking about like food and, even superior nutrition to what we have now, and then healthcare, education, these critical fields, education, again, you can have a supreme education world where instead of 100 universities, we've got a few top competitors, and maybe it turns out to be 100 top competitors, but they're all online, and the classes might have international audiences. And there's something to be said for maybe physical interaction for teaching and stuff like that. But the theme I guess I'm getting at is services will hopefully become a lot better, a lot more automatic. And then people can have this, freedom that you value, that I value, that Naval, I think, mentioned was like his core value, to basically do whatever we want. And another thing that Naval talks about is like, if he could have his choice, he would just kind of use his judgment all day to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't really care about money anymore, obviously, but I think that's, it's not just about making money. It's like what you kind of want to do. You want to be able to make decisions that change your life, that change other people's lives for the better. At least, people like me. And I do see a world where that can become a reality. Is that something, am I synthesizing your view at all, or am I totally off base?
Well, you made a big leap in there that I'm not sure holds true. I mean, one of the interesting things about it is like how much innovation has happened in the last, one of the things that was there was like panic about whenever there's technological innovation in agriculture was like, oh my God, what are all these people that we just displaced, from farming going to do? And even though innovation has very consistently replaced, the need for humans to do, first manual labor and increasingly like, manufacturing jobs, we still see unemployment, relatively low and maybe increasingly low. And so it is not that, I guess at no point previously has anything that we automated ourselves out of doing resulted in us just like sitting around and doing nothing. So, while that is like maybe I don't know if that'd be a utopia or a dystopia, but a strange kind of extreme future version. Nothing really that we've seen so far indicates that we would move towards that. I don't know how comprehensive of a framework this is, but I kind of think of it as, there's like three maybe different frontiers of human knowledge and innovation, and those are art and science and entrepreneurship. And that maybe an increasing percentage of the population is working in each of those as some of the more, some of the tasks that are just not frontier things that require, our level of adaptability and innovation and education and creativity gets done, more by AI, more by software, more by algorithms, more by robots. So maybe we'll just see, kind of the size of people working on those, the size of percentage of people working on those frontiers will continue to increase, which I think is only good for everybody, right? Like each improvement in any of those areas benefits all of the rest of humanity. And so if we can have, 20% of humans being artists and 20% ending up as entrepreneurs and 20% as scientists, like, from where we are now, I think that would be a richer and happier and more well-functioning society for all of us.
Right. So I definitely misread your perspective a little bit and didn't mean to, add my own perspective and kind of call it yours by any means. But I appreciate the thoughts. You mentioned, how that could be potentially a happier world. I want to talk, I know we're coming up on time, but I want to talk briefly about happiness, kind of the second key piece of Naval's book. And he'd probably say, I think he might say the more important part of the book, actually. what are some of the key takeaways that you've taken from what Naval's had to say on happiness?
Yeah, it's very interesting to have kind of put those two together in the book and get to think about some of those trade-offs. I'm really grateful that this project kind of got me studying those ideas early in life and thinking about them. I mean, it really the foundation of his insights on happiness are that it is a choice, it is a skill, it is something you have to work towards. It's really a set of habits. Your perspective is what determines, your internal monologue, and your perspective is what determines your happiness. And that's trainable. Like most of us just have one, and we don't think of it as trainable or changeable or malleable. But that internal voice responds to training. It responds to meditation and to practice. And there are quite a few kind of pieces in the book that talk about, in specifics how he does this and what he has changed and what he's read to kind of work towards being a baseline, increasing his baseline happiness. It's a little bit at odds with, desiring things and going out and trying to build a company, change the world, change your body, change your situation. And so understanding the trade-offs between desiring and happiness is a great place to start. Understanding that it's a skill is a very important place to start. But maybe the true 0 point is just realizing that your unhappiness is not doing anyone any favors, and that you can choose to be happy, and that will be better for you and better for everyone around you. That's not to say it's easy. A choice makes it feel like it's easy, and it's not. It's hard work, and it takes a long time, I think, to make that change in your life and to see it stick. But it is worth doing, and it is worth giving yourself that permission to do that and be that.
Yeah, I want to end, I guess, with a quote from Naval's. I don't know if he's a personal trainer or what he is necessarily, but the guy's name is Jerzy Gregorek, and he has a quote that I like. That's hard choices, easy life. Well, I guess before that, it's easy choices, hard life, hard choices, easy life. And I think to your point, framing something as a choice, it might seem super easy, but there's really difficult choices. And, as attractive as it might seem, happiness is maybe not the easiest choice for a lot of people, especially people who are highly desirous, which tends to have a lot of overlap with, really ambitious people, probably a lot of people who listen to the podcast. So I think that's a super important point. Eric, I know we're coming up on time. I want to thank you for spending so much with me today and for sharing your perspective, and first and foremost for writing the book. Again, I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to keep it handy for reference in the future. I think it's one of those books that's just really great to, whether you're skipping to your notes or skipping to a specific part, it's really good as an ongoing reference. So yeah, just really appreciate it. And why don't we end with if you could just tell people where to follow you online and find the book and everything like that.
Yeah, sure. Everything for the book is on almanac.com. It's available there for free in the digital versions. If you want the physical, you can buy it on Amazon, and the Kindle version's there as well. I'm most active on Twitter. I got open DMs if you want to, tweet me or DM me. Lots more to come. And I've got some writing on ejorgenson.com, and that's where I'll kind of keep exploring some of these ideas, and in particular, going to keep unpacking leverage and see where that takes me.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Cool. Thanks, Jake. Appreciate it.